that thing that you should never ever do. I'll just turn this off. It's interesting to note that Ken O'Keefe was at one point a US Marine, and then for reasons related to the 1991 Gulf War, decided not to be a US Marine. You may hear something about this. The word Marine comes into your life a bit, I notice. You've been involved with marine conservation. And over the years, very much wanting to see what it is that's going on, trying to create world peace, being part of the Human Shield Project in Iraq, out in the Middle East, of course, trying to, if you like, support the underdog. And as any of you who were here earlier on when we had the panel will know, was also on board one of the ships that were boarded by the Israelis when they were trying to get goods through to the Palestinians a few years back. So in other words, Ken is a man who basically puts his neck on the line. Had a few of them this weekend, haven't we? People that stand up for what they believe in and they live their truth at the risk of all. So these are people we need to celebrate. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Ken's got to share with you tonight. So a big hand, please, for Ken O'Keefe.
I'm loud enough. There we go. There we go. First off, I have to say, you know, what an incredible blessing it is to be able to be invited to a place like Glastonbury, which, you know, I've just been playing frisbee with some people in the park with the kids and whatnot, and just I have to say, there is a beautiful, special kind of energy here. I've just gotten back from Hawaii as well. I lived in Hawaii for many years, and I was there because my mom passed on earlier this year, and you know, so that brought me back to this place. And there's a very special energy there as well, and I feel that here. And I think there's definitely something very special going on in places like this. And it is a great honor and a great blessing to be invited to speak at such an event. And I thank you all for coming, to the organizers and everyone else. It's quite impressive to see how many people that you've got coming to such an event, and the kind of people that are coming here and the information that is sharing. And it really taps into the most often asked question that I get, and I know so many of the speakers here are getting, and that is, you know, what can I do? What can I do as a person? And this is it right here. This is it, seeking information, seeking to understand the reality, the truth of how our world functions, and in that process, introspectively going into yourself and being honest with yourself. This combination of seeking information, seeking to understand the truth, being honest with yourself, looking within yourself, and finding a peace within yourself, a love for yourself, is the foundation of being able to create a better world. And I believe this is exactly the process that is occurring here right now and around the world. And for all of the darkness and all of the nastiness that we see, case in point, what's happening right now in Gaza, which is, you know, just another ungodly example of how horrendous we as human beings can be. Even with all of that, there is so very much to be optimistic about, realistically so, and there's solutions. And I think the phase that we're in right now is a phase of exploration, questioning. For many years, if we go back, you know, for me personally, I was a Marine from 1989 to 1992. When I joined the Marine Corps at the tender age of 19 years old, like every other American, I was indoctrinated and, for all intents and purposes, brainwashed into believing that my nation was the greatest in the world, and freedom and democracy and all of this sort of stuff. And yeah, we're not perfect, but, you know, even though we make mistakes, we're still better than everyone else. And I genuinely believe that, just as most Americans still do, although far less now than not so long ago. And it's a very powerful reality. Indoctrination, the conditioning that we all go through, the normality of life, infects us with all sorts of nonsense, and it makes us quite stupid. And I'll refer to myself as an idiot for having done what I did, but it's very understandable that when we grow up in an environment of pure indoctrination where incessant lies are perpetuated and repeated over and over, the lie becomes the truth, and the truth becomes a lie. And this is the world that we've lived in. And really, having only started to come into awareness, I think in the mid-90s, really, I had a experience in the Marine Corps, going from being a very respected Marine, who knew my job, did it very well, took pride in what I was doing, to speaking out about something. And for me, it was just the simplest thing. I mean, I'm a Marine. The Marines are teaching us honor, integrity, and leadership by example. And I took that seriously. I mean, I didn't just accept it as, oh, okay, that's leadership by, there's something that comes with that. If you tell me that the Marine Corps is leadership by example, then if the leaders that I'm dealing with are not leading by example, then what do we do about it? And for me, it was very, very simple. Well, then you say something, you do something, you speak out. And I went from a year into the Marine Corps being a very respected Marine who, with my time in service, was in a high position of authority, to being, to quote my platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Danley, my name was Nichols at the time. He said, "Nichols, in my 17 years in the Marine Corps, you're the biggest piece of shit I've ever known, and I'm going to fry your ass first chance I get." And believe me, in the Marine Corps infantry, when your boss doesn't like you and professes his hatred for you, I can assure you, your life is going to become very difficult. And my life did become extremely difficult. And that trauma was very, very unenjoyable at the time. It was very difficult. I looked over my shoulder constantly. We were on a ship at the time in the middle of the sea, so, come on. People go overboard. I mean, things can happen. And when this reality was thrust upon me, it was the first time, really, that I had ever experienced injustice in some significant way, a real significant way. And I can understand how for a lot of people that might make them bitter. And maybe for a while it did make me a bit bitter. It made me angry that I joined on the premise that honor and integrity and leadership by example were tenets of the Marine Corps, and here I am being punished for exposing abuse of authority, not leading by example. And this very terrible, tumultuous time in my life was the best thing that ever happened to me, hands down. This was the best thing that ever happened to me, because the trauma of doing the right thing and being punished severely for doing the right thing called into question, initially, the Marine Corps. Okay, well, if I'm wrong about the Marine Corps, what else am I wrong about? And it was with that mindset that I decided, after having been released from the Marine Corps, I was supposed to do 4 years, but I was basically fired after 3 years. And because, I lost all respect for the Marine Corps. My staff sergeant was punishing me for all sorts of stuff. Yeah, I was having my rank taken away, money taken away, confined to barracks. I was called a coward by a lieutenant colonel for one of my administrative hearings, which really was just totally bogus. And dealing with all of this crap, it really, while it did make me angry, it made me stronger. It made me make a decision, which was I would never give up my freedom again, ever. And I would exercise my freedom to the hilt. And that was the kind of mindset that I came out of the Marine Corps with, and to this day, it was the happiest day of my life getting out of the Marine Corps. I remember driving out the gates the last time and just saying, fuck yeah, man, I will never, ever put myself in that situation again. And if I'm going to lose my freedom, it's going to be because I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to pay that price. That was my warm-up, and if that's what you do to people who do the right thing, well, then so be it. Let's go. And that was the period where I commenced to a very serious course of self-study and independent study. And, you could study history at Harvard and not know a damn thing about American history. Or you may know a bunch of details, but you don't actually understand the history of America. Or you could read one book like Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, and you could learn more about the history of America in that one book than you could in university studies for many, many years. And I was very fortunate that I picked out quite a few books like that. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, somebody I'd heard of, as every American and many people around the world have heard of, but very few Americans really know the truth about him, especially previous to the movie being released. And that made me realize, wow, and I had been, as a younger man, I actually developed some pretty significant prejudices towards black people. I wasn't a racist. I had a black friend, but they took us, relatively, comparatively rich, middle-class white kids, and they bussed us to the poor black neighborhood once a week for integration. And I was always a bit cantankerous, and I always, invariably got into scraps here and there. And I remember very, very vividly getting into an argument with a black kid at this poor black school, and okay, well, let's go then. And before you know it, I'm not fighting one black kid, I'm fighting 3 or 4 black kids. And it really pissed me off. I mean, hey, at the least, let's do this one-on-one, but we didn't. And that led to a sort of anger and resentment towards black people. Not absolutely, not every but in general, towards black people. This is a very understandable progression, I mean, I wasn't a bad person, and it wasn't as if I was looking for an excuse to be a racist or prejudiced. It just happened. And I would argue that this is not an accident. That's exactly what the system wants. It wants us to see these differences, these artificial differences. It wants us to see as antagonistic to each other. And for me, at least, my experience with integration was that who are these black people? Why can't they stand up one-to-one? What's that about? And I actually flirted with, in my teenage years, I came from San Diego, that was where I was raised, and I really flirted with joining some white supremacist groups, and, only by the grace of God, or however fate ran itself out, I didn't do that. But had I done that, the same ability that I have to speak in front of you or other audiences, I could have easily used to state all sorts of racist dogma. And there would have been some very intelligent, or at least clever, arguments to justify a perspective of effectively racist ideology. I could have easily gone down that path. And the reason why I'm even bringing this up is because I feel blessed for my own stupidity. I feel blessed for my own mistakes, because I don't look down on people who are in that place. I see in that person myself. In Israel, for instance, I see a nation of people who were so horribly indoctrinated into a virulent, nasty, supremacist ideology. Not all of them, of course, but many, most. And when you get into that place, oftentimes it's impossible, or at least very difficult, to get out of it. And you don't see the world in a human way. You see it in a very skewed, conditioned, purposely intended way, through a lens of racism or supremacism. And the slaughter that's going on in Gaza right now is a direct result of that kind of supremacist ideology. Now, coming from America, you don't hear people talking about American supremacism. If they use a similar word, they'll use American exceptionalism. And even Obama used that phrase in the last year, American exceptionalism. America is exceptional. This is a very poisonous and insidious kind of way of seeing the world. Effectively, it is supremacism. And when you feel that you are part of a group, whether it's a race or a nation or a sect or whatever, and that group is superior somehow, whether it's ordained by God or by your nation status or whatever it is, this is in itself very poisonous, very toxic, and very dangerous. But when you combine supremacism with incredible power, i.e. political power, power of the media, corporate power, judicial power, police power, when you combine supremacist ideologies with that kind of power, that becomes extremely problematic. And this is exactly the way our world functions right now. Those who are in power have a supremacist ideology. They believe, whether it is Jewish supremacism or American supremacism or Nazi supremacism or Shia or Sunni supremacism or whatever form of supremacism, if you combine that with power, especially power that has at its disposal weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons, this is a flirtation with disaster. This is a flirtation with total self-destruction. And this is the world we've been living in for at least many decades now. And most of us have been walking around in sort of a stupor, pretending as if we don't live on the precipice of the edge of a cliff which will lead to the end of all life as we know it. And yet, this is the reality. And for most of the last several decades, people have pretty much lived in a sort of denial and have been unwilling to face this. And still today, there are, of course, many people who are unwilling to do this. But, and this is where I find things to be so very interesting, is that since I started to become aware in the 1990s and started to seek out independent forms of history and knowledge, politics, and I started to reframe the way I looked at the world, the first thing you notice is just how oblivious, whether it be knowingly or unknowingly, people are of the world. Some people are a little bit more astute and, if they're to be honest, will acknowledge, yes, things are really horribly wrong and unacceptable, but it is what it is, and I got to do what I got to do. Other people will simply pretend as if it's not horribly wrong, and it's all okay. And again, I feel like this is very understandable, but it has changed massively since the mid-90s, where I started to become more aware. On 9/11 was an incredible example of whoa, whoa. When this event occurred, the amount of people that mostly accepted the official version and swallowed it hook, line, and sinker, and even, I remember, I think Nelson Mandela came and met with George Bush, and I remember thinking, whoa, do you not see where this is going? And for those of us who are even more aware of the agenda of the day and the agenda we're dealing with now, we can get into things like the Project for a New American Century, which, anybody who wants to understand 9/11 and, what led up to 9/11, the agenda that 9/11 basically was used to fill, has to know the Project for a New American Century, and in particular, two different documents, Rebuilding America's Defenses, and another document, I can't remember the name of it at this point, but ultimately, there were some very important statements within these policy papers, and the one that is most noteworthy, effectively, is that the Project for a New American Century, who is the Project for a New American Century? They call them neocons. This is the name that is used to describe the participants of this think tank. But I have made an active decision to be as precise as I can with my language, and I find the word neocon to be quite a clever ploy because it diverts from a very important fact about those who comprise the Project for a New American Century. And what we find is that the vast majority of the participants, although they have one token Muslim within it, are people who identify themselves as Jewish and also as dual nationals. They're American citizens and Israeli citizens. And these people who happen to identify themselves as Jewish have an agenda which fits very nicely into an agenda laid out by another individual who has been really very, very clear about the agenda of Israel. And his name was Oded Yanan. And Oded Yanan, in the 1980s, wrote a policy paper called A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. And basically, everything that he discussed in this strategy paper is exactly what we see playing out in the Middle East right now. Literally, exactly the same thing. Effectively, the policy was that Israel found itself in a position where if it wanted to achieve this ultimate goal, this wasn't stated overtly in the document, but if you know enough about history of Israel and the agenda of the Zionists and their ultimate goals, then you have to be aware of the Greater Israel project. There is a goal. The goal is to have Greater Israel, much larger than the one we see today, an Israel that expands all the way to the Euphrates, into Iraq, up into the north, into Syria and Lebanon, down into Egypt, towards the Nile, a much larger area. It would encompass current-day Jordan, parts of Saudi Arabia, parts of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. This is a goal of these people, and the only way that they feel they could achieve this goal, of course, is not overtly or in your face and honest. They could never do it that way any more than the Project for a New American Century could announce a plan to achieve a goal of full spectrum dominance, which I'll get into in a second. But what we find is that the neocons have basically the same exact agenda that Oded Yanan of the Strategy for Israel of the 1980s had. And effectively, what is the goal? Well, the goal laid out is to achieve Greater Israel. The way to achieve the goal of Greater Israel is to balkanize, to wreak havoc, to stir the shit, as it were, and to sow the seeds of sectarian hatred and violence, and to get all these goy, all these inferiors, to fight each other to a bloody pulp, and in their weakened, fractured, disunited state, in the long term, they will be able to instigate this event or that event and justify an incursion into that area and an incursion into that area, and for security's sake. And before you know it, this weakened, fractured, psychopathic state of affairs that we see, while it seems to be a disaster from any sane person's point of view, and indeed it is from any sane person's point of view, this is a disaster. But from the point of view of a psychopath who has an agenda which is based on a religious supremacist ideology, this is exactly what you want, and they've laid it out. So this is not my opinion. This is not some gobbledygook conspiracy theory. It's laid out right in front of you, and it's being played out right before our eyes. I have lived in Muslim lands. I have met many Muslims, and I can assure you, just like Christians or Jews or Hindus or Sikhs or atheists or whatever, the majority of Muslims are good people. They're not bad people. They don't wish ill will towards others. They're not actively seeking other people's harm. They just are everyday people that want to live a decent life, a dignified life, to be able to put food on the table for their families and be able to provide for their children. And it's just that simple. But we certainly have a minority within the Muslim population and other populations that are pure and simple psychopaths, and they have no empathy whatsoever. And that pretty much categorizes the people within the Project for a New American Century. These people are psychopaths. They identify largely as Jewish or dual nationals, and these people laid out an agenda. And in that agenda, they said effectively that with the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a grand opportunity for America to achieve this goal of being the world's only superpower, and to achieve another goal which they coined or termed full spectrum dominance. And this meant full spectrum dominance, control, absolute control of air, land, sea, and space, and cyberspace at this point. That is the goal, total control. No activity within any of these areas, think about that, air, land, sea, space, cyber, no activity which cannot be controlled by us. We can dominate every aspect of every part of this reality of the world that we live in. Now, of course, they stated in their policy papers, well, of course, we're America, we're better than everyone else. If someone has to be in charge, we should be in charge because, hey, we're the good guys. And of course, it's so much better that we would be in charge instead of, say, them, the evil empire of Russia or whatever. So that was the context. But I know deep down, these people are that's just for the masses. They can be only so honest. Really, what they want is absolute control over everything, every single thing, the air we breathe, every blade of grass, every single apple, orange, every food source, every source of energy, total control over everything. They said, unfortunately, the American people, and this is basically what they said in the document, unfortunately, the American people are too stupid to realize this grand opportunity, and they just won't buy it, because in order to achieve this goal, we're going to have to secure, in particular, some of the largest energy reserves in the world. And amongst those that were identified in particular were the gas and oil reserves of the former Soviet republics, which they identified as being most easily brought to market with pipelines through Afghanistan. And they also, of course, identified Iraq, second largest oil reserves, another stupendous source of energy. And they also identified the need to secure permanent military bases in key regions. So permanent military bases in Iraq, also permanent military bases in Afghanistan and the former Soviet republics. Of course, in order to secure this goal, there will be a lot of aggressive acts of war that will be necessary, and the people of America, they won't accept that. We can't go to the American people and say, well, okay, here, now that the Soviet Empire has fallen, we are the only remaining superpower, and it's time for us to use this power to go ahead and fight some bloody wars of aggression, secure the oil and gas reserves so that we can dominate every aspect of life because, hey, we're the best. That obviously would not work. So they knew they could never be honest about that goal, and they were stupid or clever enough to identify in their own document that there would need to be an event that would elicit the kind of anger and hatred in order to justify this policy. A, quote, new Pearl Harbor type event would be required. Lo and behold, on 9/11 came the gift that was that event from the eyes or perspective of these psychopaths. And 9/11 was the beginning of what is this agenda of achieving the goal of full spectrum dominance. I remember very vividly, I was in Hawaii at the time. I was already actively involved in the Hawaiian independence movement. I had already formally renounced my U.S. citizenship in March of 2001, so before 9/11. I was in Hawaii as a Hawaiian national, and I don't know if I'll get onto it tonight, but the bottom line is Hawaii is a sovereign nation. It was stolen outright. The Hawaiians were smart enough to realize if they had any chance to preserve their sovereignty and their independence, they needed to establish themselves as a sovereign nation, and they did achieve that goal. In fact, Britain was the first nation to actually formally recognize them. And my participation in that movement, along with my renunciation of U.S. citizenship, in general disregard for illegitimate forms of authority, made me enough of a target where I had warrants issued for my arrest. I had a rather large $11,000 bench warrant issued for my arrest. Keep in mind, I'm a business owner. I had my own scuba diving business that I built from the ground up. I was working on marine conservation issues. Personally, I rescued like 46 endangered green sea turtles that were wrapped in fishing line. I led a campaign to get a marine sanctuary created on the north shore of Oahu where I lived. I had faced a lot of potential problems, threats against my life and business, and I had harassment from the police, including an $11,000 bench warrant, which, believe me, if you look like I do and you get pulled over and they run a check on you and see that you have an $11,000 bench warrant, get out of the car now. Out of the car now. I mean, you know, you're going to have to get on the ground and you're going to have to make sure every movement is just correct. And trust me, if you don't already know, cops kill people in the U.S. all the time. All the time. This is not a game. So, I mean, you know, there was already, from my perspective, an awareness of, you know, what this entails, taking this kind of path. But when 9/11 happened, I just saw the reaction of the people, and to me, all the flags everywhere, they look like swastikas, man. Like Nazi Germany and swastikas, like, whoa, you really, and I mean, that's a whole other story, but the bottom line is, you know, you had people hook, line, and sinker just emotionally controlled and ready to go and do this policy, which was laid out by the Project for a New American Century, you know, for a totally different pretext, but that was the agenda. And I didn't know the details of 9/11. How could I know that? Of course, I didn't know. But I knew that it was some form of a false flag event. I certainly knew enough to think in terms of who benefits, who's in a position to carry out such an event. Is it realistic that 19 hijackers, including Mohammed Atta, a guy who's snorting cocaine, drinking booze in strip joints, going out with a stripper, flying on a jihad? You know, come on, man, come on, please. It's an insult, an absolute insult. These are CIA assets, dupes who paid nice money to go here, go there, do this, whatever, and nice little patsies who we lay the blame on when clearly they were in no position to carry out this event. I mean, this much should have been evident pretty quickly. The fact that Osama bin Laden was never even charged because by the FBI's own admission there wasn't sufficient evidence to link him in any way to 9/11, which of course there wasn't. He had nothing to do with it. He was an idiot fall guy who worked for the CIA, and like every other person that deals with the devil, trust me, you ain't going to get no favor in the end. Saddam Hussein can testify to that. In fact, he was our little attack dog when we had a problem with Iran, and where is he now? So, you know, if you want to deal with the devil, there are some immediate rewards, but in the long run, good luck to you, because it ain't going to pan out too well. And America, to me, and even the world, I mean, people who I would have thought might have known a little bit better, Europeans and whatnot, you know, seemed to buy this hook, line, and sinker. And I literally fled the United States, keeping in mind I lived in paradise, had money, doing something I loved, you know, respected in the community, and I left. And I sought political asylum in Holland, and that was a nightmare for the Dutch. Like, Jesus Christ, man, we really don't want an American refugee, especially if it's valid, you know. And it was valid, and the Dutch they committed a fraud to try and get me out of the procedure, and I caught them. I caught them red-handed committing a fraud. And they were forced to put me into the refugee procedure, and I lived in a refugee camp there with people from all around the world, and you know, a great, great blessing. And basically, I left America, didn't know anybody in Holland, and you know, had some family here in England. But you know, I went down this very unique path, and along the way, I have tried to be as astute an observer of human beings, society, especially Western society. And what I see is an incredible amount of change in terms of the awareness of people from 9/11, which, come on, that's only 13 years ago. I mean, that's not that long ago. You know, for all the decades and even centuries before that, effectively the powers that be have used propaganda and lies to quell and maintain the system of tyranny that has worked actually pretty well for them. You know, we are constantly in a state of war, constantly fighting each other, constantly fighting for the crumbs that are brushed off the lavish tables of these filthy rich psychopaths who've been afforded the right to print the money and effectively buy anything and anyone that can be bought. And this is the world that we live in. Instead of a world which we live in a world where people of honor and integrity are punished. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was my experience in the Marine Corps. Excuse me, but I'm doing the right thing here. Aren't I supposed to be rewarded for helping maintain this honorable state which the Marine Corps purports to be, and exposing those who aren't leading by example? And of course, I was very naive. Totally naive. I was an idiot, for Christ's sake. I didn't know a damn thing. I was only a product of an environment of indoctrination which makes us purposely ignorant. And we've gone from that, which is definitely the norm, a state of collective insanity and ignorance, where there's still plenty of collective insanity, but the awareness is such that if we go back just last year, we have an event that is so monumental, so profoundly revealing, and yet most people, I don't think, have really any idea of just how profound and important this event was. And it reveals something even more powerful. And the event I'm talking about is what happened in Syria, what's been happening in Syria, but in particular, what was happening last year. If you recall, there was this unending campaign of, here's the red line, if Bashar al-Assad uses chemical weapons, then boom, that's the one. Then we have to go in and help the people of Syria, just like we went in and helped the people of Iraq and helped the people of Afghanistan. We'll have to help the Syrian people if they are so violated by their latest Hitler, which we self-identify. And you had the same exact pattern. I mean, for those of us who've been watching the pattern, it is so obvious. And it's disgusting, almost painful to watch it, because you see these people, and if you're like me, and I'm sure there are plenty of you like me, in terms of, you sit there and you watch the TV, and you watch these assholes get away with saying the most heinous bullshit that is so offensive and so clearly wrong, and any person with any integrity and half a brain, if they were there to be questioning them, could make these people look like absolute idiots for what they're saying. But that doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen, with rare exception. And the irony for me is that the BBC, an institution that I despise, oh my God, this institution is responsible for more death and suffering than even the governments, if you ask me. Because the impact that these people have, that this institution has on people's understanding is so intense and so profound that we could not have invaded Iraq in 2003 without the BBC. No way. No way. The BBC and all the other mainstream media, but nobody more than the BBC, made that happen. And they made that happen by fostering all sorts of lies. And back in 2001, most people, the vast majority of people, really bought this stuff, or at least they thought, oh, well, Colin Powell got up in front of the UN, and he, hey, he had these diagrams, and, Colin Powell, George Bush, we don't like him, but Colin Powell, hey, he's an... Come on, man. And Colin Powell was an apologist who basically helped cover up the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. Just do a little bit of research, and you'll know that that's what this guy does. He's a liar. He covers up crimes. That's his role. And because he has a black face, we're supposed to think, oh, he's somehow more legit, like Barack Obama. And I remember that process, like, whoa, how is it possible that they can trout out one actor after another, and we're supposed to believe that this is somehow another option, and this time we're gonna get it right. I'm sure all of you must remember Tony Blair. Tony Blair was the second coming of Christ. He was going to be the savior of this country. He was going to provide equality and justice and all sorts of wonderful things. He's just the latest branded, packaged puppet. And, they keep coming out with a new version, 2.0, 3.0. Barack Obama, that was a good one, I have to say. They bought a few years with that. But thankfully, they're running out of these options. And from 2001, where I fled the stolen nation of Hawaii, to be correct, it was hard watching. After that, there was another incursion into Palestine, into the West Bank, more slaughters in Gaza, and the things that were being said. Ariel Sharon, my God, one of the most offensive, nasty, ugly people that you can imagine. Whoa, I feel sorry for this man. Oh, what a horrible existence. That virulent, nasty, toxic, poisonous perspective that he had. And, they were going into Palestine and they were doing all this sort of stuff. And most people were buying it. At least they had questions. If they didn't buy it, they thought, well, I'm not really sure. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But with Syria last year, you had all the same tactics. The BBC and CNN and Fox and all this, they're very effective. This stuff, the way they package the information, the way they present it, it makes a huge difference just in the way you package it. You can have a incredibly, intensely, profoundly intelligent, program, content, whether it's a podcast or an internet program, video program, with the most stimulating, important information. But if you don't package it right, if it doesn't look a certain way, only the very, very interested and dedicated truth seekers are going to pay it attention. The way you package it has everything to do with how many people will receive it. And so they still have that, the powers that be. They have the media, and they can package it in such a way that it is so impressive. And these people, they're obviously experts, so they couldn't possibly be lying about what they're saying. And they surely can't be so stupid as to not know of better options. But indeed, that is the reality, because the packaging is so good. But even with the packaging, last year we saw another example of the same tactic and strategy that has worked carte blanche, without exception, throughout every single bloody, nasty intervention in war that we've ever seen. It's worked every single time, and I mean every single time, whether it's the Falklands War or Vietnam or even World War I and World War II, which ain't fucking great by any extent and were total manipulations. And I really, really would encourage people to take another look at these great wars, especially with the anniversary of World War I this year and all this sort of stuff. It's worked. It's worked time and time and time again. And they were doing the same thing last year, leading up to it. And I mean, it is really just, I'm sure I'm not alone, painful to watch people get away with saying and repeating these lies. And it's not a matter of, oh, I love Bashar al-Assad, or oh, I hate Bashar. Come on, man. Come on, please. Aren't we not tired of this ridiculous game of one bogeyman after another? I mean, are we seriously going to buy into one after another? I mean, let's get into Gaddafi as well. Look at that country. Man, I was in Libya a month or two before the whole thing kicked off there, and I can assure you they were a hell of a lot better off under Gaddafi than they are now. A hell of a lot better off. And we do this every time. Name me one country we've ever truly benefited in terms of our impact, especially when it comes to war. And they were doing it with Syria. And what was so remarkable about this is that a lot of people, I'm sure, they're just war weary. They're sick of it. They just they've had it. Many people, especially in America and also in this country, know people who've been to war and have been traumatized or have been killed or have been maimed from it. In fact, how many people in this audience know somebody directly who has been in these wars that we've been involved in? So a decent amount, a decent amount. We've been touched, indirectly or directly, we've been touched by these activities. And here they were again, pounding the drums of war and trying to convince us that Bashar al-Assad is the latest Hitler, and for the sake of the poor Syrian people, we need to go help them. We need to get rid of this monster because we're the good guys, and hey, that's what we do. And it's worked. It's worked time and time again. But they carried out an event, this chemical attack last year, I think it was September of last year. It was almost laughable. So here you have Bashar al-Assad. He's got the whole world gunning for him, basically. All the political powers, all the media, they're all gunning for him. This fits perfectly in line, by the way, with Oded Yanan's strategy for Israel in the 1980s. Sow the seeds of sectarian hatred, man. Give the worst psychopaths. You got people over there that like to cut people's heads off alive. Christian bishops cut their heads off with dull blades, live, man. Yeah, give them guns. Yeah, give them anti-tanks. Give them weapons. This is what we've done. We have done this. Our governments, whether we like it or not, whether we pay taxes to the UK government, US government, it's our governments which have given our bedfellows over there in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, we gave them the green light to take their dirty money and funnel it to these psychopaths who've been running around the country and basically stirring the shit to the nth degree. And to the point where it is about as hideous as it gets. I mean, go online. I'm not really in the habit of watching all of these crazy, insane videos, but I remember last year someone sent me a video, and the line that got me was, it's a 17-minute video, I could only make it to like the 8th minute or something. So I said, okay, I'm going to watch it. And I watched the whole video, and wow, whoa. I mean, if there is even just one shred of evidence that the end result of our policy is funneling money to these psychopaths, who is going to be responsible for this? Because if this is not a crime against humanity, to give these kinds of psychopaths this kind of weaponry and this kind of political support, media support, and whatnot, if this is not one of the greatest crimes against humanity that we can imagine, then I really don't know what is. And this is exactly what was happening. We were arming these psychopaths indirectly through our proxies in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and they're wreaking havoc on that country. And while it may seem to be problematic for Israel, and many of the experts and commentators will say, Israel's nervous about what's going on. No, they're loving it. It's just what they want. And what is so remarkable about Syria, and what I think people should take stock of in its influence and impact, is that with all of the effort that has uniformly been successful in getting one agenda of war after another carried through, they did their false flag chemical attack, which, by the way, Bashar al-Assad, while being targeted by the entire world, being villainized left, right, and center, apparently is such a suicidal idiot, or so completely stupid, that he invited, after many months of trying to get UN inspectors into Syria, after months of this, the UN inspectors come into Syria at the request of Bashar al-Assad to go and look at the evidence about so-called chemical weapons attacks. And within either 24 or 48 hours of these these UN inspectors coming in, he attacks just outside of Damascus, 10 miles away from the UN inspectors. After months of inviting them in, he decides that he's going to use chemical weapons to attack his own people. It's beggars belief. Are you serious? I mean, come on. I mean, really. I mean, come on. And the fact that, of course, all the mainstream media will tell the story as it's meant to be told, and none of them will have the decency or honor or integrity to say, well, it's a bit weird why he would do that, especially the timing, UN inspectors coming in and 10 miles away from them. That's probably not the smartest thing, I mean, at the very least, we have to conclude that he is a complete and total idiot or totally suicidal. And if you want to make that case, then you go ahead and make that case, but don't tell me that this man, if he's not a complete and total suicidal idiot, would do this. It's just the kind of thing where you don't even need to know any history or context. Really, just think about it, seriously. And if you do believe that he's a suicidal idiot, well, okay, fine. But I don't, and I've looked at what the man says. I've listened to it. I can imagine the situation that Syria is going through. I actually have family through my wife that have, by the grace of God and their own resources, were able to get out of that country. But this was a horrendous thing. And what was so incredible was that for the first time, and I've been watching this, been very astutely watching people and events, the way it's reported, the reactions, what we do, the policies, are they carried out? And uniformly, they've been carried out. And so they did this false flag event, pinning it on Bashar al-Assad, and it fell flat on its face, absolutely flat on its face. Of course, we had the Prime Minister, Cameron, calling for Parliament to come home, and we need to discuss this very important matter. And historically, every single time a Prime Minister has done this sort of thing, every single time he's gotten the result. Every single time. Not only did he not get the result, the Parliament, which is a den of corrupt, nasty individuals, with some, there's always some exceptions, but for the most part, they're nothing but a bunch of prostitutes. And they They couldn't even vote on it. They couldn't even vote on it. I would argue that the reason why is that there's one thing that they need from us. One thing. And let's go back to 2003. You had the largest protests in the history of the world. Unprecedented. Worldwide. And that's with all the lies. Can you imagine if we were told even half of the truth about what led up to that invasion, how many more people there would have been? And also, let's not ignore the fact that the numbers that we get in terms of how many people are out on the streets, who gives us those numbers? You know, they have an inherent interest in reducing the numbers. So, you know, the numbers are almost assuredly significantly larger than whatever it is that we think, or at least what we were told. And we had the largest protests in the history of the world, and I remember that time very vividly. I initiated the Human Shield Action to Iraq. I did so because I knew the invasion of Iraq was preordained. I knew the connection to the Project for a New American Century. I knew about Oded Younan's plan or strategy for Israel in the 1980s. I knew that weapons of mass destruction, for Christ's sake, and all this other crap, you know, concern for the Iraqis was absolute rubbish, an insult to our intelligence. It had nothing to do with any of that, but of course they could never be honest about why we were invading Iraq, because if they were honest about it, there is no way any of us, any sane people at least, would in any way accept this. No way. And it made me angry in 2002, 2003, the drums of war beating, knowing this invasion was coming. It made me angry that people, in my opinion, kidded themselves into thinking that protests were going to stop it. I knew they weren't going to stop it. No way. And I felt then and now that many people protest because it salves their conscience a bit. It makes you feel better about yourself because, hey, while I don't agree with the policies of war and it bothers me, I did go and protest, and so therefore I can accept effectively what happened. It's not something that I like, but hey, I did my part. And I asked myself, is that it? Is that the most we're willing to give? You know, we're talking about an entire country which is going to be invaded, which previous to the invasion was already going through a hellish existence. Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State, all too famously said on 60 Minutes, practically the biggest American news program, that when asked, you know, about 500,000, this is official figures here, 500,000 children dying as a direct result of the U.S. and largely UK-led sanctions against Iraq, you know, was it worth it? And she said, you know, this was tough, but on balance, we think it was worth it. 500,000 children? Holy crap. Can you imagine even 10 British children dying as a result of some horrendous, inhumane policy that directly resulted in their death? I mean, come on, there would be outrage. 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 500, 500,000 kids dead. You think it was worth it? Whoa. And this kind of stuff, you know, this is the world that we live in, because we have a world in which the control of finance basically allows a tiny minority of private bankers to control virtually every aspect of life, because when you have literally an infinite supply of money, and I mean infinite, there is no limit. Imagine yourself as a banker, given the authority by a treasonous government, whether it's a UK government or a US government, given the authority to print money, which, by the way, the US government can't even audit. If they want to audit the Federal Reserve, they can't. How does that work exactly? How is it possible that a tiny group of individuals, who, by the way, officially we don't know who it is because it's a secret. It's a private bank with secret shareholders, which cannot be audited by the government, which can put as many zeros in as many bank accounts as it wants. And guess what? When you own the governments and you own the courts and you own the media and you own the corporations, is there anybody who can stop you? If somebody would like, an insider, say, to report the Federal Reserve or the Bank of England for corruption and funneling money to criminals, what do you think is going to happen to that individual? Good luck to you. This is the world we live in, and what it does, the result of this is that everything is upside down. So, in this Orwellian 1984 world of ours, when the politician speaks of peace, what he really means, war. When we talk about justice, really, we're talking about tyranny. Everything is upside down. The person of honor and integrity, that person will be punished. They will be intimidated. They will be arrested. Sometimes they will be killed. Oftentimes they'll be tortured. They certainly won't be rewarded. No. The person that this system rewards, pedophiles are good. Pedophiles are excellent, man. We like pedophiles, man. They're really good, especially when we can get a videotape of a grown man buggering some little boy. Because probably that individual is not going to be very outspoken about the corruption of our system, if indeed we have something like that. In fact, if I was a tyrant who wanted to manage my tyranny, I think this would be a very effective way of having a controlled puppet system of government that allows for total uniformity, total control. How many here think that's an outrageous statement, to think that maybe people in power use people like pedophiles as pawns in a game that they can control? Is it outrageous for me to say that? No, it's not, is it? And so, this is the world we live in. We reward the most vile, disgusting, immoral, violent psychopaths. In fact, the system is very much set up to identify these people. And once identified, to reward them, to mold them, to foster their progression through the system. And ultimately, if you're really good, to prime minister or president. And that is the way the system works, and it will continue that way. But even with all that, going back to Syria, even with all that power, last year, for the first time in history, you had a population that didn't buy it, did not buy it, did not buy it. And the one thing that they need from us, the one thing they need, is at least a modicum of consent. At least some consent. In Iraq, in the case of Iraq, whatever the accurate number would be, I think it's reasonable to conclude that maybe at least it was probably half and half, or maybe, more people were against invasion. Who knows exactly, but there was a decent segment of the population that basically bought into it. They bought into it, and that was enough. That is enough to provide the consent to be able to carry out the policy. But with Syria, they have their polls, they have their surveys, they have their focus groups. They're not completely stupid. They definitely want to be in touch with the word on the street. And the word on the street was clear. Nobody was buying it, especially in an environment of austerity. Oh, we've lived beyond our means. So sorry about that, folks. Gonna have to cut back, tighten up the purse strings. Sorry about that, education, well, we're gonna have to reduce the budget for that. And sorry about the health care, too. And oh, well, you geriatrics out there who've worked your whole lives, and now, as a pensioner, you've got to make a choice, food, heating. Got to do it, it's just that way. We've lived beyond our means, got to do it. But hey, Syria, oh my God, the people of Syria, boy, we have to help them, don't we? Jesus Christ, doesn't the heart ache from that? I mean, whoa, got to make sure and help them out. And people just didn't buy it, they did not buy it, and therefore did not provide consent, and therefore the parliament couldn't even vote on it. And in America, the U.S. Congress is the most, what an embarrassment, how any red-blooded American patriot couldn't be so ashamed of this horrendously bent-over, disgusting, servile group of traitors who swore under oath to uphold the supreme law of the land, the U.S. Constitution, and have destroyed and defiled it to the point that the Constitution is no better than the toilet paper that you wipe your rear end with. This is America. This is that government, and they couldn't even go to a vote. Think about it. If they did go to a vote, the parliament or the Congress or both, there was two obvious outcomes. One, they voted against it, which basically that's never happened. Not when the policy is war. Always, 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 always. So that would have been incredible, and it would have really given lots of power to the people. Like, whoa, we really didn't want this, and it really didn't happen. So the other option was, hey, our puppets are paid. The videotapes of pedophiles and other, disgusting, servile, prostitute, politician puppets is such that they will do what they're told to do, and, they will vote for war, and we will go to war. In my opinion, the powers that be, the ones who have control over the money supply, who, through the control of the money supply, have bought everything and everyone that can be bought, I believe that they deduce that we can't do it. This is too dangerous. If we have these puppets authorize war in this environment where virtually everyone is against it, there is going to be something that will occur that could possibly bring our entire system of power down. And while the powers that be clearly have an interest in fostering chaos, they like to manage it to a certain degree, and they don't want total chaos, at least not most places. Although I see a lot of evidence for instigating total chaos in the United States, a lot of evidence. V for Vendetta looks like a prediction of what's going to happen in America if the powers that be have their way. But the bottom line is that Syria didn't happen, and it didn't happen not because we had the largest protest in the history of the world, not because we signed the largest petition ever, or any other typical method that we use to try and carry out our agenda to stop policies of war. All it took was not buying it. Don't believe you. Don't buy it. That's it. You don't have my consent. You don't have any of our consent. That's the bottom line. So, go ahead. And they didn't do it. Now, you may disagree with me, but I will make the case by what I've said that this reveals the most incredibly important fact, in my opinion, and that is that we are in charge. We are. We can make anything happen we want. It is truly up to us. Along with that, if that's correct, comes a serious responsibility. And this, I think, really hits the core of why a lot of people don't want to go down this path, because along with awareness and understanding comes responsibility. You cannot sit by and watch mass murder when you have taken responsibility, in whole or in part, for what is happening. The only way that you can sit by and watch that happen is by saying, well, I don't have anything to do with that. I went to the protest, I voted for the other guy. So, yeah, maybe I pay a little taxes, but, hey, that's not we are responsible. We are responsible. We are responsible. And it will never change. It will never change until we take full responsibility and do what we're capable of. And the beautiful thing is that all we really need to do is not buy it. Piss off. Don't believe you. We know you're full of shit. You're liars. You're prostitutes. You've sold your soul to the devil, literally. And you serve an agenda which is the most dishonest, disgusting, virulent form of psychopathy that really one can imagine. And we've had it. Not giving you our consent anymore. And I believe this is exactly what's happening. We look at the policies in Ukraine. We look at this insanity going on in Gaza yet again. And I think what we're seeing is the last throes of a dying system of tyranny. And I don't think it'll be much longer before we really do see a domino effect. Someone's going to break ranks, There's going to be some insiders. There are some of them who are not completely compromised, some of them. I know in America, as an example, that there are people who are in fairly high positions of power in the U.S. military in particular. Many of them are family people, they did hold their hand up and swear to uphold the supreme law of the land, and it bothers them. It bothers them, the way this country, America, has gone. I've actually, because of things that I've done, I've become a little bit of a thorn in the side of the state of Israel. And in particular, I was on this ship, the Mavi Marmara, that was attacked in 2010. And, you know, the official line was we were carrying terrorists and potentially weapons and blah, 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 blah. So they attacked us in international waters, and what was so beautiful about that experience, despite the tragedy of it all, is that I was with people who not going to take it, not going to lie down. No. Go ahead, come with your guns, do whatever you want, but we're not going to sit down and accept it, period. Not going to do it. That's very rare. You don't see much of that these days. You know, you really don't. And it was an honor to stand shoulder to shoulder with people who had reached that point, you know. And up until the time of the attack, I can tell you what an incredible place to be. You had people from 38 different countries. Although it was largely Muslim, there were many of us, myself included, non-Muslims, Western countries, Eastern countries. We had people from all around the world united by one thing. They couldn't accept the reality for the Palestinian people, in particular, the collective punishment which continues in Gaza. And enough is enough, time to take a stand. And what happened on that ship was really incredible. The fact that I'm still alive is in itself a small miracle. I was involved in disarming 2 commandos. One commando, I took his 9mm pistol off of him. I could have easily used that weapon and taken him out right then and there. For all I know, that guy was responsible for executing some of the 9 that were killed. Actually, there's 10 now. There was a 10th man who was in a coma up until a few months ago. So for several years in a coma, he finally passed on as well. So there's 10 dead. The UN Human Rights Council report, which is really the only legitimate report about that event, concluded many very powerful things. But amongst the conclusions they made was that of the 9 that had been killed at that point, 6 of them, 6 were executed. The evidence was ballistically very clear that they were executed, i.e., that some of them, including a 19-year-old boy named Furkan Doğan, an American citizen of Turkish descent, who was holding a camera, who was up on the top deck. He was shot initially at distance, and he was holding a camera. So if you want to make the argument that he was in some way threatening, well, it's a bit difficult because, you know, the bullets, they came from distance. There's a lot of ways to be able to assess, you know, at what range did a bullet come from. And the first bullets hit him in the foot and in the lower leg, and then another bullet came through the back of the neck and actually went through his lung, fractured a couple of ribs, and went out the front of his body. He was dying, probably, by all accounts, but still alive and on the ground. And on his back, the final bullet entered his body from an Israeli commando who stood over him and fired at point-blank range. A shot just below his right eye, went through the head, done. End of story. We know that it was at close range because of the tattooing, the flash from the gun. You can see the tattooing, the burning from that if it's fired at close range. He was executed. He's a 19-year-old kid. The fact that I took a pistol off of one of these guys and actually had that pistol in my hands in this position, in a safe position like this for several minutes, I really didn't know what to do with the weapon. I didn't feel it was right to throw it in the sea because this is evidence. You know, we need this evidence, and maybe we can somehow get out of this, and like that needs to be turned over. This is, I'll bet you the bullets that come from this will be matched to some of these people who are dead now. And so I kept the weapon, and I even went up to the captain to the bridge after trying to like figure out who to give the weapon to. And I went up to the captain, who I became friends with later, a really good guy. And I said, hey, do you want this weapon? And he looked at me like, get that fucking thing out of here, you know? What are you doing here with a weapon? And I took the weapon out, and eventually I just said, okay. And I took the bullets out of the weapon, and I gave the bullets to some people, and I hid the weapon in the hopes that it would be, you know, handed over to authorities later. And so that happened, and eventually, you know, blood everywhere, people, you know, dying or dead. Eventually we surrendered, and they took us into Israel, and, you know, I pissed off the Israelis even more. I actually had an Irish passport and a Palestinian passport that I was given by the prime minister, the last democratically elected prime minister of Palestine, Ismail Haniyeh. And I had this passport, and when we knew we were going to surrender, I decided to get rid of my Irish passport and hold on to my Palestinian one, so that when they did process us, here you go. You want to deport me to Palestine. And, I could get into details of what happened. I was beaten up at the airport, Ben Gurion. I had another altercation with one of these idiots who didn't like my attitude. And I swear to God, if I were Muslim or Arab, I'd be so dead by now, it's not even funny. I wouldn't last. I would not last. Someone with my kind of mentality, you're not going to last, man. You'll be violent, and maybe you'll take some of your enemies out, but you ain't going to be around that long. There ain't no longevity. So I really relate to people who live in these hardcore, unjust environments and who revert to violence. And yet, I in no way glorify it. It's a tragedy for everyone involved. And the fact that I survived this attack is blessings from God, the universe, however it works. And 2 days after being released, after being the last one released, after they beat me up in the airport, I was released. And 2 days after that, the Israeli Defense Forces issued a press release, and it's still online today, stating that I, amongst four others, but I in particular, they named me specifically, they actually named me as a British subject, which I'm not, you idiots. Where did you get that? Do you not at least do basic checks, for Christ's sake? They said I was a British citizen, but they also said that I was a, quote, operative of the Hamas terrorist organization, and that I was, quote, going to Gaza to form and train a commando unit for Hamas. So you had me 2 days ago. I'm here in your jail. I'm actually refusing to simply be deported. I'm demanding that I go into your court system to make charges against you for kidnapping and crimes against humanity, piracy perhaps. I don't want to leave. In fact, I did everything I could to stay there. And here I am 2 days later after you release me, and now you're saying that I'm a terrorist operative of Hamas. And what I say to that is, thank you very much. I will take that as a badge of honor. I am truly blessed to be identified by one of the greatest terrorist entities that has ever existed as a terrorist, because in this upside-down Orwellian 1984 world of ours, I am indeed a terrorist. But in truth, I'm just a human being who refuses to accept the unacceptable. I know that the world is this way because we allow it to be this way, and the moment we take full responsibility for this world, we will be able to change it and actually hand it over to our children in a state that is far better than what it is right now. And if that ain't the primary duty of a person, a parent in particular, if we're not all deeply concerned, afraid, or even ashamed of the way this world is right now, and deeply saddened and concerned about the future for our children, then something's gone terribly wrong with us. How delusional can we be? Because at this pace, there is not much of a future for our children. In fact, the future looks rather bleak unless we really, really do take control and do what we're capable of doing. And for me, this is what I see. This is what I see in this world right now. And while I do not know what's going to happen, I feel it's very dangerous to assume that it's going to go one way or the other. Very dangerous. Do not assume that it's going to be the age of Aquarius and we're all enlightened and hey, kumbaya, it's all great. That may happen. I'm not saying that it won't happen, but it's certainly not an absolute. And I defy anyone to give some sort of proof or evidence that that is an absolute. It's a possibility. Another possibility would be one that we've been dealing with for many, many decades now, and that is that one event could easily cause a chain reaction of events that could lead us down the path of global thermonuclear war. This is distinctly possible. And in fact, we've come this close many times. It's not just the Cuban Missile Crisis. Many other times we've come this close. In fact, there are many stories from high-level military personnel, both in the Soviet Union and in the United States. They've stated this on record. We know this is true. We have come this close. Is that not completely and totally unacceptable? Is it not? How is it that we are able to go about our lives as if this is somehow remotely acceptable. Now, having said that, I'm not suggesting that everyone drop what you're doing, drop your job, forget about the bills. We know that these institutions, the way that we have to live our lives, are actually very purposely engineered so that we won't have the time to engage effectively. We are distracted through sports and pop culture and all of this nonsense, and this is the world that we live in. So it's very effective in its engineering at preventing us from doing what a human being must do in order to feel truly human. Because for me, it is impossible to feel human and to have any kind of peace of mind if I don't do the best that I can, understanding that it is not up to me. It is most definitely not up to me. And it's not up to you, but it is up to us. It's up to us. And I mean the masses. I mean those who largely consider themselves impotent and incapable of effecting change. You are delusional and willfully ignorant, perhaps, if you believe that. The tyrant enjoys one person above all others, and that is the cynic. The cynic is the tyrant's best friend, because the cynic creates a reality of impossibility. It is the way it is. Death and taxes. Can't change it. I'm only one person. Accept it. This is reality. And you know what? That's true. If that's what you believe, you're damn right. That is exactly correct. But guess what? If you don't believe that that's the case, if you actually have the arrogance, and this is one of the good things, for all the bad things we can say about America, and this can be bad as well, but I mean, if it's done in the right way, it can be a really beautiful thing. The idea, we can all be president, we can all achieve success, and the American dream is there for all of us. If you believe that, no matter how skewed the reality is from that, if you really believe that, it's true. It's possible. It's possible. But if you don't believe it, you're not going to try for it, so it definitely ain't going to happen. Unless your goal is to win the lottery or something, which a lot of people, apparently, that's their goal. We can affect a better world. And I would argue that really, for all the things that we could be focusing on, and I believe everyone has to focus on what feels right to them. My way is my way, and the idea that someone should do what I do is ridiculous. Unless, of course, it feels truly natural to you, and that's where you want to go. But everyone has a unique path, and yet I feel there's one simple thing that we need to change if we want to change this world. But my caveat to that is that the first step in truth is to go in. I firmly believe, and I still have more of a journey inward. I've not reached total consistency with what I aspire to be and who I actually am. I believe this is a never-ending journey. It transcends a human life. It goes on for eons. It goes on through different manifestations of life, karma, some people call it, your experiences. I firmly believe it's never-ending. I don't even believe in death, and it's part of the power that we can have. If you don't fear death, you're a hard person to control. If you don't fear loss of material wealth, you're a hard person to control. If you don't have fear, you're pretty much impossible to control. If you're fearless and you have some level of wisdom, now you're a problem, man. That's a serious problem. The system, the powers that be, they really don't like that kind of stuff. In fact, they know that that is exactly the type of person that can infect other people. And God forbid they get infected to the point that they actually understand the truth, which is, we can't maintain any of this crap without you. They need us, man. They need our consent. They need our complicity. They are nothing without it. They have nothing. Tomorrow, we could end this system. And if there was one thing that I would say that we could do to end this system, it is as simple as looking at who controls the money supply. It's that simple. I have no idea how long I've been talking, how long I have left. Can anybody give me an idea of...
You've got another 25 minutes if you want.
Wow, excellent, wow. And, you know, when so much power hinges on one aspect, there is a tremendous vulnerability, a weakness. You never hit your enemy at their strength. So, for instance, violence. While I understand those who resort to violence, especially in cases where your land is occupied, your land is being stolen, your people are being killed, I 100% defend the right of self-defense. I myself would no way sit by while my family is being murdered. I would pick up a weapon and I would kill every last invader I could and happily die in that process. I would not be able to live with myself if I sat by. That doesn't make me a better person, a more courageous person. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying, honestly, that is the way I am. It's who I am. It's the truth about me. Everyone is different. When you provide no meaningful way for people to seek redress and correct the problems within society, they will, of course, resort to violence, which, of course, the system loves. Because where is the strength of the system? Violence is one of their strengths, boy. You want to beat them at that game? Good luck with that one. You've got the police, you've got the military, you've got all sorts of weaponry, and a lot of weaponry we don't know about. That's just foolish. Don't fight your enemy at their strength. Fight them at their weakness. What is their weakness? Well, if you ask me, the truth is the greatest weakness of all. So they must maintain a myriad of illusions. The truth is the most powerful weapon of all. The truth shall set you free. And yet, the truth is very frightening, understandably so, and the truth also involves taking responsibility. If you know of a crime, then you cannot sit by, especially if you can be connected to that crime, you cannot sit by in good conscience and do nothing, or very little, and feel good about yourself. You may, if you're really good at employing various forms of denial, be able to salve your conscience a bit and feel somewhat okay. But deep down, whether it's subconscious or conscious, you will have a problem with yourself. You won't feel at peace. There will be an unease about you. The only way to relieve this pressure, at least from my experience, is to do your best. Be realistic about the fact that it's not up to you as an individual, but do your best and challenge yourself. Push yourself. Don't be a lazy ass. I mean, come on, man. I mean, you know, what we say is our best today can be even better tomorrow if we truly push ourselves. And I think human beings, a lot of these speakers too, I was sitting next to Mary, I forget her last name, who gave a talk about indigo children and things like this. And so many of these subjects are so remarkable and so liberating, but of course they're very frightening as well for a lot of people. And I understand that. I mean, I get that. I get how it's frightening. And it's like learning. It's the same exact process. Everyone, I think, can understand this. When you start to learn a subject, if you decide, you know, I'm going to learn this subject, what is the most difficult part in that process? It's the beginning, isn't it? You don't really know anything. You're not able to make connections. It's just trying to remember this, and I don't understand why this is this way, but I got to remember this, and got to remember that too, and it's hard. It's hard, you know. But if you stick with it, you eventually reach a point where, yeah, that, I understand how now that connects to that, and shit, I didn't even realize, but that actually connects to this other subject over here. I can start applying that knowledge to my understanding. You know, before you know it, you're connecting dots, and it becomes actually really enjoyable. You reach a point where you start really enjoying the learning process, and then you actually get to start applying the knowledge. And if it's good knowledge, then it has a positive impact on your life, and you start enjoying the benefits of taking the time and effort to learn whatever it is you've learned. That is the same experience with truth-seeking. In the beginning, it's hard. You feel like an idiot. You don't know. That's like surfing, too, when I learned to surf. You know, going from being on a boogie board, a bodyboard, and moving to a surfboard and trying to stand up, you look like an idiot. You look like an idiot. You're paddling, you try and get up, and you fall all over the place, and you just look goofy. You got to get over it. Get over it. Get over it. You're going to look stupid. That's just the way it is. Keep going. Keep working at it, and eventually you're going to reap the rewards of persistence. And that's the truth. That's my experience. In the beginning, especially for a lot of people, it's very frightening. Very frightening. The idea that, for instance, our own government would be actively involved in carrying out events like 9/11 or 7/7, you bet they are. Yeah, you bet they are. That's hard, I understand, for a lot of people to accept. It's so hard that the conditioning is such that they won't even entertain the idea. They just can't do it. It's too much. And that's okay, because it is an exceptional person that is able to overcome the fear and take an honest look at the world and themselves and try to make sense of how the world works, and if you have it within you, to confront in whatever way you do. And everyone has a way. Everyone has a way. I'm staying with some people. One of them works for the BBC. I despise the BBC as an institution. As I said earlier, these people are directly responsible at the higher levels with war crimes and crimes against humanity, because the propaganda that leads us to war is essential for actually carrying out the war. Without that propaganda, you couldn't even carry out the policy. And yet, I look at this man and I don't think, oh, wow, you work for the BBC. That's ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And the police. I don't look at the police and say, oh, you're policemen. Come on. The police are human beings. People who work at the BBC are human beings. We live in a system whereby if you want to take care of your family, you're going to have to take some sort of job. There is nothing wrong with working for the government, for the BBC. Not that you need my forgiveness. I'm just stating the fact because I believe it's important. We're in a tough situation with tough choices. And for whatever reason, the path that I've been able to walk is such that I have ever since I left Hawaii up until in 2001, I left Hawaii where I was a businessman, I was successful, doing something I loved. I went to almost being a pauper, drifted from one place to another. By the grace of and the generosity of various people, I had a place to live. I always had enough money for food and occasional drink and some fun. But I worked basically doing whatever I wanted to do, what I chose to do. And I just got by that way with the love and support of my mother as well, who, God help the child who doesn't have a loving mother, and so many don't. If I didn't, again, I might be filthy rich, but I'd be a son of a bitch, I'm sure of it. I definitely have skills, and I could be White House spokesperson or something, but she gave me something that was so incredibly valuable, and by simply allowing me to be who I was. I was loved. I always knew I was loved. I was secure. I never questioned whether or not I'd have a home. If I was destitute and I needed to play, I always go back to my mom. A lot of people don't have that. I had that, and that allowed me. I also had a mom who did not have an expectation of me. She only wanted me to be happy. However, that was for me. And I did so many dangerous things, and I was, an only child. So this is it, She loses me, that's it. You can imagine. I'm sure some of you have lost a child. And I can only imagine how horrendous that must be. It's just probably the worst nightmare that exists for a parent, aside from maybe your child disappearing and never seeing them again, which probably is about as bad as it gets. She did not have expectations of me. She allowed me to make mistakes and just be who I was. And for the last 15 years, up until about a year and a half ago, I basically did whatever I wanted. I did work that I generally didn't make any money for. I went to places that were oftentimes dangerous, and I basically got out of my system what I needed to get out of my system. And now I have a platform where I can release this stuff. It's therapeutic to be able to say what you feel, and to do so without any self-censorship and without any fear of repercussion. It's a very privileged place to be. And really what I want is for everyone to enjoy that. Because I tell you what, being free and not afraid, stating what you believe and having the kind of strength to stand behind your position, especially when that position is based on justice and humanity, compassion. This is a wonderful place to be, and despite all the darkness and all the insanity of the world, I really want all of my brothers and sisters in this one human family to enjoy the fruits of this approach to life, and for us to be able to hand over this world to our children in a way that we can feel proud of. And observing from the mid-90s to today, I feel, I smile inside, I have a chuckle inside, because despite all the power that those in positions of power have, and I mean literally, they still own the media, they still own the governments, they still own the corporations, they still own the banks, they still own the courts, they still own the police, they still own the CIA and the military. They still have all of that. And despite having all of that, they are scared shitless. They are deathly afraid of what's happening, because already you have a minority, and people make a huge mistake, if you ask me, in focusing on the masses. Stop being preoccupied with the masses. The masses follow. This is what they do. It doesn't make them good or bad. It just is the reality. The minority trailblaze a new path. The minority confront systems of power and challenge them. The minority have the kind of strength to stand up and be a human being and not fear the consequence. This is normal. This is not something to think you're great or you're bad about. It just is what it is. The masses follow. Right now, they are following what is being put up in front of them. So they follow football, they follow sports, they follow pop culture, and they follow Facebook and whatever. They're following all this stuff. And they will continue to follow that stuff. But the people that really, really, really matter in terms of the way this world goes, it's always been the same. It's a minority. Always, always, always. A minority has had a disproportionate impact on the reality of life on planet Earth. And it remains the same today. The only difference is that the minority that has historically controlled the world that we live in has maintained a couple of very, very important tenets. And one of them is so critical that I'm dumbfounded. And I'm sure there will be people here who will say that this was all engineered, it's all part of the plans, they're going to pull the plug. But one thing you cannot allow, if you're a tiny minority and you want to control masses of people, information is power. You cannot allow access to information, unhindered access. Very controlled access. Only specific authorized people can have access to information. If you allow the masses access to information, you see exactly what we have happening in this world right now. You have people to the point now where Syria, going back to Syria, why didn't they buy what was happening in Syria? Why? Well, because over time, those institutions which people have historically looked to give them information about whatever event it is, their authenticity, their legitimacy has slowly but surely been eroding away. And while the erosion of the normal, historically powerful institutions of power, the media, have been dwindling, we see the internet and the power of a blogger, of an independent journalist, an independent filmmaker. We see all these different options. And in the sea of information out there, there is, of course, a lot of smoke and mirrors, and there's a lot of diversion, disinformation, fear-mongering, there's all that. Pornography, video games, you've got all this stuff, but you've also got access to information. Most everyone in this audience is old enough to remember, as I do, what it was like to research before the internet. You had to go to a library, for Christ's sake, and you had to go look for a book, and then, Hopefully there's some good information in that, but now, come on. And, you know, the same rules apply. You need to have some critical thinking skills. You know, you have to be able to disseminate between valid, verifiable, supported evidence, factual evidence, and pure conjecture, not supported by any valid empirical evidence. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't have value. It just means that you cannot back it with anything else. You have to have basic skills of research. Everyone has this. I mean, come on. You don't need to be a Pulitzer Prize-winning prostitute of a reporter to have those skills. Anyone with half a brain can develop these skills. And if you're really good at it, then, well, you know, hey, you can be a Pulitzer Prize-winning, in a legitimate way, reporter. And this is what we have, myself included. If I want to know a subject, then I can find out rather quickly. And the more you learn, the more you're able to actually authenticate certain sources and connect the dots. It becomes easier and easier to start seeing. And really the most important thing is not the abundance or amount of information. That's not really that important. What really is important is identifying the pattern. Because once you identify the pattern, you don't need to know all the details. I mean, I think people get way too wrapped up in trying to know all the details. I'm happy to admit I don't know tons of dates and details about all sorts of issues that I do discuss, and I'll openly admit that. I don't know. But does it in any way change the identifiable pattern that we see? If you tell me this specific fact, does it in fact change or in any way skew the pattern? No, it does not. The pattern is so consistent and so easy to identify once you reach a certain point, and more people are reaching that point. We have, in particular subjects, false flag events, for instance. I mean, 9/11, false flag was a term hardly anyone knew to start. And in America and in this country, I know there were plenty of people where if you went to someone and said, the government did that, they'd want to punch you out. They would want to punch you out. Boy, who are you? You traitor, you know. And, you know, that was pervasive. That was pervasive. Here we are, 13 years later. Now, if you really seriously believe the official version, I mean, there are plenty of people who do. I'm not saying they don't, but, you know, if you seriously believe that, wow. Wow, then I got a fairy story for you. You know, I mean, whoa, seriously, you are mind controlled. Literally, this is proof of mind control, because someone who can think for themselves does not need to be an engineer or an architect to know that what we have been told clearly does not jive with reality. And this process has already reached a point where a minority of conscientious people who are seeking the truth, that number of people, while it remains a fairly significant minority, it's growing. It is growing in such a way that I would argue, along the lines of critical mass, tipping point, the 100th monkey, that it can't be stopped. It cannot be stopped. I would venture a guess that the powers that be, they know this. They know it can't be stopped. The only thing that could possibly maintain the system of tyranny that is their system is something akin to a third world war. They need a big show, another big enemy for us all to unite against and fight against. They need warmongering 13.0, you know, I mean, they need the next version. And Syria has posed some real problems for them, because the same tried and true tactics that have worked over and over again did not work last year. So the show's going to have to be a little bit more impressive this time around, I reckon. I probably, if I was a betting man, I would think probably it will be an alien invasion. If I were them, especially when we get into some of the technology that exists, the possibility of projecting what appears to be physical objects in the sky, you know, the anti-gravity or inverse gravity, technology that exists. And it does exist. I mean, come on, let's take a look, man. It's there. That technology and this ability certainly exists, and probably there is no single threat that would have the capacity to unite people so sheepishly as an alien invasion. So the show is going to have to be a real good one this time around. 9/11 was pretty impressive, I have to say, but this one's going to have to be a real humdinger. And barring that, I don't know how they're going to pull it off. If you look at the policies, you have to conclude that those in power are one of two things. One, blithering idiots who genuinely think that the policies that they're carrying out are in line with their stated goal of justice and peace. We don't want war, we really, but we need to help you. Yeah, okay, all right, okay, so let's say that that's the truth and you really want peace. Israel is a perfect example. Brilliant example. The Israelis are unceasing in their genuine desire to have a just peace and to find a partner in peace and to follow the roadmap to peace and all of this sort of stuff. And yet, let's look at the policies. In the case of this recent mass murder going on, I think they've made what is, maybe not just yet, but down the road, going to be a fatal mistake. I don't know how many people know this. I haven't been watching the news, and I don't know how pervasive this understanding is, but Netanyahu and Shin Bet, they knew there was a very good chance that these 3 Israeli boys were dead. They had more reasons to believe they were dead than they were alive. And yet, for roughly 2 weeks, they continued this campaign of, we want our boys back, bring our boys home, and tug at the heartstrings and get the people supporting this, oh my God, it's, Jewish pain and suffering again, we've lost our loved ones, They knew information and gagged the media from revealing that information to whip it up, so that you can then pull the punch, pull the punch. They're dead. They killed him, Hamas. Oh, Hamas. And the Israelis will say, we want peace. But this is their policy? Is this how you go about wanting peace? Of course they don't want peace. Of course they don't. And the powers that be use nothing more than puppet prostitutes to carry out an agenda. And more people are realizing this. And if I'm correct, it's already reached a point that can't be stopped. And if we just continue to be steadfast in our commitment to seeking the truth, to being honest with ourselves, and to, in our own unique way, contributing to the process of affecting a better world, I firmly believe that we will have that world. In fact, most people will say, but not in my... No, in your lifetime. Trust me. In fact, soon. In fact, if you ask me, we're going to one of 2 extremes. And the powers that be are doing their best to instigate a 3rd world war, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Libya, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Afghanistan, wherever they go. They want it. They're trying. They're trying consistently. And if you watch closely, you'll see that the way these things are playing out are intended to foster a 3rd world war. I think already what we have achieved by simply not buying it is pretty monumental. The game is not over. We could destroy this entire planet, or at least most all life as we know it, but we could, if we continue down this path of genuine commitment to the truth, affect a better world, something that we can truly be proud of. And for me, one of the most rewarding and beautiful aspects of understanding this is that I also accept it's not up to me. As much as I want it, as much as I am willing to give to see it happen, it just ain't up to me. It's up to us. And while I'm willing to take my responsibility, my level of responsibility, I am not singularly responsible for this. We are. If we decide to take responsibility for the world we live in, we will affect a better world, I'm sure of it. I have faith in humanity. I have studied anthropology. I'm a student of human interaction. I've done my best to observe people, to interact with them in meaningful ways, and I am absolutely sure that people, for the most part, are good at heart. I don't care where you come from, Palestine, Iraq, England, America, I don't care. The normal, average person is decent, good, and they don't wish harm nor foul towards you or anyone else. If they were left to their own devices, they will live quite peaceably and agreeably with the rest of us. This is the world that I imagine, and because I imagine it, it is possible. If we imagine it together, then we'll make it so. Thank you very much.
Ken O'Keefe. Thank you.